It's time for todaysstocks.com with host Pat Bolland.
Joining me now is Ron Rocca. He's the president and chief executive officer of Exagen Inc. Ron, a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you, Pat.
Ron, there's a couple of developments that I want to talk to you about. Before we do that, though, the audience may want to know what kind of a company you are. There is a lot of medical diagnostic companies out there, and Exagen is in that space, but what do you specialize in?
Thanks, Pat. We are a patient-focused, discovery-driven organization. We are a testing company, and what that means is we provide diagnostics, prognostics, and also monitoring assets for the patients and the doctors. We focus in on autoimmune diseases, and we do that through the rheumatologists. Rheumatologists see the most autoimmune patients. So if it's a skeletal muscle autoimmune disease, we're interested in it, and that's our focus.
Okay. Against that background, the two announcements have to do with pricing of a company called Avis Lupus, as well as PLA Code for Avis Lupus. Let's start with the code. What is a PLA Code? How do you get it? Those kinds of things.
Sure. A PLA code is a unique identifier that the government gives you, CMS, and by different MACs, not to get too technical, but ours is called Noridian. So a PLA code is an identifier for your asset. And when a testing company like us subscribes to get a PLA code, that code is then used for the payers and as well as the physicians to identify what that product is and therefore get reimbursed. We get reimbursed off of that code.
Okay. How many tests are we talking about?
So what we're talking about is Advise Lupus that got the code now, but Advise Lupus is also embedded in one of our other products called Advise CTD, connective tissue disorder. So we're really talking about the Advise Lupus asset that got the PLA code.
Okay. Then reimbursement obviously is an important company aspect. What is this whole pricing mechanism and what does that mean?
Yeah, well, so we are very honored because our MAC, Noridian, did give us a price of $1,085 for the asset. And what we did before we got the PLA code, which is normal, is we did what's called CPT code stack. And that got us roughly, $300 per test. But while we were getting that, we were developing our documentation, our evidence, if you will. And that clinical evidence is what's called a dossier, and that's what we put together. That's the clinical utility, the clinical validation, and the analytical validation, along with the healthcare economic study. We put that together after we've created demand. We've got over 600,000 orders since launch. And then we go to our MAC under CMS, which is Noridian, and they gave us a price of $1,085. So it's a significant uplift. It's one we feel is very deserved for the amount of value we are providing the patient.
Let's talk about that value and timeliness in particular. How quickly do you turn around your diagnostic reports?
Yeah, so being an esoteric lab, we pay very close attention to this. We try to turn around as quick as possible. Our normal turnaround time is 5 business days. Even with COVID, we tried to adhere to that. Obviously, with personnel being out, it was a little tough. But that's the goal, to give the doctor the information in a quick turnaround time. And 5 days is significant because that's usually about the time the patient comes back to get their results.
Well, I come from a medical background, at least my parents and one of my sisters are doctors. That seems unusually quick. Lupus always took a long time to diagnose, didn't it?
To diagnose or to turn around, the turnaround time is how we turn around the test. To diagnose, it takes a long time. There was an independent study by the Lupus Foundation of America that said it took 6 years to get correctly diagnosed with this potentially deadly disorder. That's crazy. That's just too much because lupus does not wait till you're diagnosed in order to do what it does, which is basically eat your organs, your kidneys, your lungs, your heart, your brain. So waiting 6 years is unacceptable. Further in that study, it said that half the time the non-rheumatologists got the disorder wrong. They made it either fibro or something else. And even a third of the time, the learned experts, the rheumatologists got it wrong. So this is an absolute need the rheumatologists have. They can clinically try to diagnose you, Pat, but the patients always say the same thing. They say, I'm fatigued. I got this brain fog thing in the middle of the day. I got joint pain all the time. I get these rashes. And somehow the doctor, based on this observation from the patient, has to render a decision. Quite frankly, what I just said to you as far as symptoms, that could be anything. So when the doctor thinks, well, it might be lupus, then they write our test, either advise CTD or advise lupus. That gives them the information necessary to render the right decision before they put them on a therapeutic.
Wow, that timeliness is really going to help to save lives, or at least make lives more comfortable and understandable, at least in case of a disease. Let's go back to the PLA code that you got for the advised lupus. How does that fit within your strategy for advised CTD?
Very simply, because advised CTD is basically advised lupus in the middle, and then 12 generic markers around it of those disorders that most frequently overlap with lupus. A lot of times lupus patients will have Sjogren's. A lot of times they'll have RA. So you want to make sure the doctor doesn't just pick on one diagnosis and stick to it, because when your body attacks itself, it doesn't care what disease it's attacking. So the way it affects it is that we got this price of $1,085 from Noridian, and then we surround it with the 12 generic markers of other disorders, and then that gets sold at a price of a value higher than the $1,085. It's $1,085 plus the other markers.
Wow. Ron, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you, Patrick. I do appreciate it.
Ron Rocca, President and CEO of Exagen Inc.